Hey y'all, what's good? It's your girl Bea. Welcome to my chambers, bitch. I didn't love this video because we're gonna be talking about drug history and true crime in the same sitting, all right? While doing my makeup. Okay, I've never done one of these videos where I'm like doing my makeup and talking about a specific topic at the same time, because I usually just talk about whatever the fuck's on my mind. But today we're gonna like stay on track with this. So for that reason, I'm gonna keep my makeup pretty like simple. Well, I do want to do something a little more dramatic just to keep it with like the theme, you feel me? But we'll see what happens. I don't know what I'm gonna do with my makeup. Just kind of go with as it goes. Go with as it goes. But anyways, today we are talking about the case of Dorian Corey, the drag icon who had a literal skeleton in her closet for maybe like 25 fucking years, dog. Like, let's get to it. In order to emphasize Dorian's importance in the drag community, first we need to recognize the importance of the drag community in the first place, more specifically the Harlem ballroom scene of the 1980s and 90s. In New York formed this underground scene of shameless expression and acceptance as a creative in the industry or just as a hobby. A lot of these people weren't necessarily drag performers. Like, a lot of people attending the balls weren't necessarily drag performers, just oppressed individuals looking for a place to let out and leave behind their stresses and worries of everyday life.
Beyond the performance or throwing shade, these balls create a safe space for empowerment and belonging.
Whatever you carry with you, you leave it on that floor.
Vogue, or voguing, is a dance style developed from the Harlem ballroom scene in the 1960s, so it wasn't until the 80s that the Harlem drag community really began to reshape and transform it into what it is today. It's sort of like a more lively and abstract replication of the traditional fashion models at the time, but like in dance form, which is where the style derives from, is like the fashion models in the Vogue magazines, kind of, like I said, like replicating those poses and whatnot, just overall reflecting that feminine power, but in like a stylistic and entertaining manner. But also, as Willie Ninja put it, is like a safe way of throwing shade.
Voguing came from shade because it was a dance that two people did because they didn't like each other. Instead of fighting, you would dance it out on the dance floor, and whoever did the better moves was throwing the best shade, basically. So voguing is like a safe form of throwing shade.
There's 3 different types of voguing. Most of y'all are probably familiar with Vogue Femme, since it's quite popular in like pop culture and whatnot.
Let's go. I got a jolt in my bones, invoking fit and some daughters on to bring.
Lots of hand and arm movements, you know, catwalking, spinning and dipping, all that good shit. The new way is heavy on flexibility, and like Vogue Femme is a lot more animated than the old way that we're talking about today. The OG is more focused on like precision in your movements and posing to the beat. The moves are more elegant and fluid, and the performance usually ends with like striking a pose. Returning to the 80s timeline, performers would group into houses, and Dorian was a mother of her own house. This was alongside other legendary groups such as the House of LaBeija, House of Ninja, all of which are featured in the documentary Paris is Burning. Paris is Burning is a documentary that was filmed from the years 1987 to 1989 and was directed by the beautiful Jenny Livingston. This documentary captures the prevalent ballroom culture in New York City at the time, originated by its Latino, African American, and LGBT communities alike. I just did that slit so horribly. These balls technically were competitions, but the environment definitely had a lot more to do with unity and celebrating creative expression within a community that doesn't receive their deserved appreciation, doesn't get their flowers on this sort of thing.
Voguing is an attitude, a style. It's
a kind of institutionalized showing off, but not without its entertainment value.
Something very spectacular, very important art form, very important.
It's just so theatrical, and the energy, it's just terrific.
And these competitions had quite diverse categories, so you really could walk the runway however you wanted to, whether you wanted to show off like your sexy body, pretty face, high fashion, whatever the fuck. Like, there was something for everybody. Essentially, the only mainstream discussion on gay life was STDs and young death, which is why I really admire the way that Paris is Burning really captures the beauty and triumph that is in fact alive within these communities that it represents. It's just refreshing in a time that was so shameful. This period in Harlem is essentially stained with economic disparity in the city's own crack cocaine epidemic. So needless to say, the population could use an escape, right? And Dorian even says in the documentary, if everybody went to balls and did less drugs, it'd be a fun world, wouldn't it? And I can't argue with that. So I think what makes this film so relatable and captivating is its presentation of these people with so many different prejudices behind them, overcoming so many different adversities from AIDS and poverty and racism and just all these different struggles that come with being gay or colored in America, all coming together to get glamorous and dance and celebrate life. You know, it's the beautiful. It's really beautiful in a way that is reflective of what it means to survive as a human, whether it be medical illness or domestic abuse, mental suffering, systematic setback, whatever. We're all just trying to keep our heads above water and thrive in life's moments of freedom and fun, you know?
Liz Taylor is famous. In a sense, so am I. But a very much different quantity.
So why am I schooling you on drag history? Because I wanted to. And because the star of today's video is a very important character in the cornerstone of New York ballroom culture. She's a primary figure in this popularization and transformation of voguing in the Harlem ballroom scene in the 80s.
No magazine's gonna run up to cover me if I go to a premiere. But it's still a fame. It's a small fame. But you absorb it, you take it. And you like it. You like the adulation, the applause, the people cheering you on, the winning. It's like a physical high. It's a good high. It's an addictive high, like all highs in the long run turn out to be, but it's a high that won't hurt you.
None of y'all were gonna tell me I needed like something on my lips. Thanks. Dorian Corey was born in Buffalo, New York on June 6, 1937, and she started performing drag and designing clothes at a very young age, which she would go on to make a living out of after finishing her education at Parsons School of Design. Dorian founded and designed for her own clothing line called Corey Designs. She became a very exclusive seamstress and costume designer. Her work was very sought after in the New York drag scene, and she was very known for her very elaborate, stunning beading.
Beads.
In the 70s, Dorian toured with a drag cabaret group by the name Pearl Box Revue, and apparently Dorian had a little shtick for snake dancing, so she performed with like a live boa constrictor. Sounds like my type of entertainment right there. I would like to see more reptile and drag queen duos. I'd like to put in a formal request for more sequence and scales combos. But for real though, about the snake thing, I don't know if it was actually something she would often do. You know what I mean? Like if she like was a reptile girly and this was one of her snakies, or you know, somebody else's snake she'd often perform with, or if it was just a one-time thing, a cool performance she did with somebody's snake and it really like stuck. I don't know, but I just read a few times that it was like something she would do, so that's sick. Really the only notable project from this act was an LP they released by the title Call Me Mister in 1972. Besides this, they would often perform at Sally's Hideaway and their humble backup, Sally's 2, on Times Square. When researching this group she was a part of, I came across an account from the daughter of Jay Joyce, who is a member of Pearl Box Revue. So I just wanted to read off a few things she had to say. My father managed another group for over a decade. It was my grandmother that mothered the group at a time when drag queens were seen as a subset of strange and somehow deformed individuals without much value to society. We also loved his friends, but not so much Dorian, who was a true diva and not much use for children, although she did tolerate us and actually made a few outfits for my sister and I read that and I was like, girl, what do you mean? Anybody that makes me an outfit is a damn friend of mine. But anyways, this doesn't have to do with Dorian, but I love to just share people's stories. So she goes on to say, he was also a hairstylist in Mount Vernon, New York. He was the owner of Chez J, and his partner was Denzel Washington's mother. So there's that for a legend. Some of the most quotable and introspective lines in the documentary come from Dorian's mouth, in my opinion at least. And I actually happen to really relate to some of the things she was saying, which is not common for these people that I look into. One of my favorite things I've heard her say is, now it's all about designers. It's not about what you can create, it's about what you can acquire. Got that shit memorized. And that is so true in the beauty like community. Everything's about what you can like get your hands on and knowing the most information rather than appreciating organic skill and originality. It's truly as if popularity is prioritized over genuine creativity nowadays, and that probably applies to so many different fields, like for real. Anyways, back to Dorian. In the 80s, she was a frequent act at that Sally's Hideaway place we were talking about, which was burnt down and then rebuilt as that Sally's 2 joint. This establishment would actually be the place where Dorian held her very last performance for their Grammys night on May 8th, 1993, where she won Entertainer of the Year. Nearing the end of Dorian's life, she and Pepper LaBeija were planning one last performance in Webster Hall, which unfortunately would never take place. Because at age 56, Dorian Corey died of AIDS-related complications on an August Sunday in the Columbian Presbyterian Medical Center in Manhattan. Her remains were scattered by loved ones in the waters off City Island, New York. Not unlike other artists around the world who want nothing more than for their art to make its rounds, be charged for what it is, you know. Dorian specifically instructed her homegirl to go through her belongings when she was gone, you know, take what you want, sell what remains. Lois Taylor was a fellow drag performer and a very good friend of Dorian. And toward the end of Dorian's life, Lois was essentially her caretaker. She took care of Dorian, and the AIDS really took a toll on her body, and in the end she was in charge of her estate. On October 19th, 1993, about 2 months after Dorian's passing, Lois brought 2 customers into Dorian's apartment in Harlem. Since it was the spooky season, these 2 men were apparently just looking for capes to wear at a Halloween show. With all these elaborate costumes and glamorous accessories, there was a lot to go through, right? So they're just sorting through these heaps of clothing and whatnot. While rummaging through the apartment, Lois makes way to the wardrobe area, and sorting her way toward the back of the closet, she notices this large green plaid garment bag just kind of chilling behind the rest of the costumes. There didn't seem to be any effort to really conceal this item. It wasn't necessarily covered by anything besides, you know, like the other costumes hanging with it in the closet. However, what was weird was that the bag was pretty fucking heavy. Like, even when compared to these other, you know, the heavily beaded gowns and these huge costumes and whatnot, it was so heavy that Lois didn't even bother to like flip it over, look for a zip or anything. She literally just instructed the 2 customers to just grab some scissors and cut that bitch open, you know, like, let's see what's in this loaded ass garment bag, right? But as soon as they cut into the fabric, they smelled those infamous ickies that come with all of the found a dead person stories, right? Except, dude, they must have been like bad, because I'm usually like, let me skip the details on this sort of shit, but dude, like, I ain't never heard anything like this, so just fucking bear with me for a second. After actually examining what was at hand here, it was discovered that this corpse was half decomposing and half mummified. So like, she wrapped it up, but not that well, and she covered in baking soda, but not that well. The body was left in fetal position, wearing tattered boxer shorts and one sleeve of a t-shirt. This was wrapped in several layers of imitation leather and plastic bags. First the plastic bags and then imitation leather over it. And like I said, she didn't do this very well, so the body was still losing liquid, which left it, quote, floating in its own soup, unquote. All right. The condition of the cadaver was described in an article by Atlas Obscura. Its formerly brown complexion, now purple and yellow. Its blue and white boxer shorts tattered with a bullet hole in its head. So anyways, enough of that. you get the point. Shit was nasty. I'm assuming that we're all on the same page here, that Dorian murdered this person. But for the record, it was said in a New York Times article that Dorian was known to keep a small pistol in her apartment, so there's that for the gunshot wound. Inside of the bag were also a few of those like pull ring tab thingies from beer cans. These tabs were really the only indicator for the police to use as any sort of time of death for this individual, to at least determine an estimate on how many years this cadaver's been cadavering in the closet. The style of flip-tops found hadn't been used since the 1970s, implying that this body could have been sitting in that closet for like 15-25 years. The police immediately get on Lois's ass on some like, if we find your fingerprints on it, and apparently she shut that shit down real quick, as she should, and sent it as bluntly as possible. I'll tell you one motherfucking thing, you might find my hands on top of that damn thing, but I only weigh 135 pounds. I couldn't lift that thing. So, just wanted to add that in case anybody's like, well, what did Lois have to say about it? That's what homie small, dead guy big, enough said. And for the record, Dorian Corey was a whole like 6'2", so very much adds up there. When asked by the New York Times if Lois had seen how the body was wrapped, she told them, no, child. After the cops came, I didn't go back there. You look at something like that, honey, that's something you won't ever get over for the rest of your life. Valid. Next guy in our spotlight, Detective Raul Figaro, which sounds like a fake name, but whatever. Anyways, this fool was the officer responsible for identifying the cadaver. I don't know how common of a procedure this is, but when I was reading this part of the case, I felt like I was reading a damn lab report from fucking Rick Sanchez. Like this shit was weird, like weirding me out for real, but whatever. I don't know what goes on in forensics. Maybe this is like an everyday deal, but whatever. Detective Figaro removed all 10 fingers from, you know, the dead guy, as if he hasn't been through enough, and then he places each finger into its own cute little specimen bottle. Then he injects it with acetone to quote plump it up, end quote, dips them in ink and like rolls it onto the fingerprint cards so that he can send those cards to different units so they can like hopefully identify it that way. I'm reading the words that came straight from this man's mouth, all right? All of a sudden, the finger starts turning into a finger. From looking like nothing, a skeleton into a finger. I got beautiful prints out of it. Explanation point and everything, dog. Like, anyways, I can't hate on the man because it worked, all right? So they were able to identify this man as a Robert Worley. Robert Worley was born in Fairmont, North Carolina on December 18th, 1938. He was the last child in a family of 7, and apparently he wasn't particularly close to really anybody, or anybody in his family at least. Don't know anything about his upbringing, but in 1963, Robert Worley was convicted of rape and assault of a woman, and I don't know the specifics of this arrest, but I'm pretty sure it was just like a random attack, and either way, he spent 3 years locked up in Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York. After he got released from prison, he changed his name from Robert Worley to Bobby Wells. I'm not sure if this was a legal change or just like an alias he went by from this point forward, but that's what I'm gonna call him from here on out because it's easier and respectful. With his snazzy new title, he moves in with his brother Fred Worley in Washington Heights. This wasn't like straight out of prison though. It's a good few years after he was released. No idea what he was doing before or after prison for real, but whatever the fuck he was up to in that 2-year post-release period of his life, a whole ass kid came out of it. So he fathered a son at some point, and I don't know if he was like running away from that, if that's why he ended up all the way in like Manhattan and shit, but either way, don't expect like a update on that kid because I just heard that he fathered a son at some point, and that's that. While staying with his brother though, it was said by his brother that he tried to talk to Bobby about his quote lifestyle choices, but that liquor would get in the way of any sort of like intervention, and that he'd apparently just drink vodka straight from the bottle was like an everyday thing. So very much a alcoholic. And after that 3-month apparent depression in his life, Bobby just disappeared. but it wasn't out of nowhere. I'm actually just gonna read this part directly from the source because it's a lot of back and forth between Fred and the interviewer, which, by the way, I'll have all these like main sources links in the description box, but it reads, he got attracted to a woman who lived next door. They had a run-in and he roughed up one of her kids a little bit, a boy about 7. She said, I'm gonna call the police. And when he heard the word police, he took off. That's the last time I saw him. Almost 25 years later, Fred Worley got a call saying his brother had been found dead. Did it surprise him? Not really, he said. I stayed in the same place another 7 or 8 years, and my family stayed in the same place. So when none of us heard from him, we figured something had befallen him. After they got word about his body, they let the city bury their brother in Potter's Fields on Hart Island. Do you know if he got involved with transvestites? Oh yes, he said matter-of-factly. I think they had a relationship. I didn't know this was in him until one night he was living with me. He was obviously stewed. He called our house well after midnight thinking he was calling his transvestite friend. And he talked and talked and I listened. Did she have a name? Yes. He was searching for the name but could not come up with it. Dorian, that was it. This is who he thought he called. You're absolutely sure? I was afraid he was trying to tie up all the pieces. I'm absolutely sure about that. Absolutely? Yes. From what I gathered, Worley said, they'd had a little spat and my brother's trying to put some emollient on the problem. I asked if it was possible his brother tried to beat her up. I think he was pretty macho, yes. I'm pretty sure that he acted out his violence with her, but I have no first-hand knowledge. Maybe he went too far once? That could be, he said. That very well could be. So yeah, outdated terminology aside, I'm quite certain that these two were in some form of a romantic relationship because of two things. First off, the little dialogue we just read through seems to like fill in a few holes. You know, they apparently had phone calls and were obviously in a contact in the phone basis. Second reason, I initially assumed this was like a sexy time gone wrong situation until I realized that homie got popped like straight bullet in the noggin. So now I'm thinking this was like a domestic handling, if you were handling what I'm putting down here. But like on the other side of this story, apparently, dude, nobody in Dorian's life like ever heard of a Bobby or a Robert or even like a boyfriend for that matter. So I don't know if Dorian was just really private about that shit or if there was like a reason she was specifically private about that relationship. I don't want to speculate too much because we really do only have the word of Fred, like Bobby's brother. But anywho, so I don't know, y'all. What do you think? Was this like a random robbery, like a random attack on wrong as suggested by many other sources, or was this like a lover's dispute that ended in the worst way possible, or something else entirely? All we know is Bobby Wells was effectively a missing person for 25 years, and looking back on those pull tabs, I'll let you do the math on that one. I had this question in the back of my mind the entire time researching this, like, did she ever move it? Did she ever move it? Did she ever move it? Because I feel like 25 years is a very long time to occupy one apartment, but I thought that was just like my ignorance as a person who's incapable of living in one place for a whole year. So like, I don't know. I was like, maybe, you know what? Maybe that's what people do in New York, live somewhere for like 30 years. I don't know. I really wanted to believe that this was just like some freak accident and she stuffed that shit in the closet, tried real fucking hard to forget about it, you know what I mean? I was seriously just going to ignore that detail. Like, maybe she moved it, maybe she didn't. I'm not gonna look into it. Like, ignorance is bliss, baby. And now I feel like obligated to acknowledge it. Like, I can't ignore it anymore. I have to acknowledge that possibility that she moved this shit, like she visited this shit. Like, I don't want to say visit, like turn it into some fucking Hellraiser shit, but God, I don't know. Just to make my skin crawl, I'm like, maybe I just have weird morals, but I just find it so much more disturbing to think about like re-interacting with the person that you murdered. You know what I mean? Justified or not, you killed somebody and now you can't pretend that it didn't happen because you physically encountered it on at least one other occasion. Like, that for real fucking happened. Like, that just rolls out any excuse of denial or somehow drowning it out of your memory. Like, nah, she didn't know what she did and she left her best friend to find it. Like, that's fucked up. Now I guess I need to address that part too. Like, Dorian left her best friend to find the mummy in her closet. She literally specifically instructed her to go through her shit, like go through her closet, knowing damn well there was a no longer alive person in there. See, like, even though I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt before, like, maybe she just forgot, LOL, I can only entertain that so much. Like, no, she knew what she did and she left that shit and she like left her friend to find it. It's crazy. You couldn't even like deathbed confession or anything. Like, you really just had to like act like it didn't happen. That's crazy. That's crazy. She shot a guy that she might have even had deep feelings toward and then just stuffed them away in the place where she sleeps after a long day and cooks breakfast in the morning. Like, bitch, like, I don't think that's something that you necessarily just adjust to. But then again, I've never concealed a cadaver in my closet, so what do I know? Ignoring the absurdity of living with a rotting corpse for like 20 years, I still have some thoughts about the actual crime and her failure to alert the authorities about whatever the situation was, both leading up to the fatal wound and, of course, not notifying anybody about the dead man in her apartment. I would bet cold motherfucking cash on the idea that Dorian wanted to tell somebody. Like, that shit has to haunt you unless you truly are on some Jeffrey Dahmer shit. Like, I just can't imagine getting a good night's sleep with a dead man on the other side of the room. I really want to believe that Dorian would have spoken up if she wasn't so familiar with the dead end that is asking the police for help. It's either a dead end or you fuck up your life and the lives of the people around you. And y'all, I'm not even talking about speaking up about killing a guy. I just mean, like, if she was in fact being abused by this man. So as tragic as it is to say, police do not, and especially did not, give a fuck about a transgender woman being abused by her partner or by anyone for that matter. Teasing these resources that are available for everybody when in reality they're in fact very limited or just completely non-existent for selected populations is what ends up getting people killed. It really be coming down to that shit. That's why our society is stumped at gang violence and killing each other in the street, is because it's set up that way. There's no actual help. It's all trickery. It's like a bribe to get you to rat on your own people. Even if your sole concern is about your safety or justice for yourself or others, there's probably way too many cases out there, ongoing ones, where people do know something but are afraid to speak up. Because underrepresented minorities going to the authorities about literally anything almost never ends well. Maybe if there were equal resources provided for all communities, then we wouldn't end up with literal skeletons in the closet. Say she could prove he was abusive, on top of his previous abuse charge even. She'd still get charged on some first-degree shit, and then what would be in the newspapers the next day? Psycho transgender kills her gay lover in her drag quarters. Like, am I wrong? Like, I'm not trying to paint it like Dorian is some hero for not informing anybody about the life she took, alright? I'm just very big on wiggling my little toes into other people's shoes to at least make an attempt to sympathize with what brings people to their breaking points, or even just the spur of the moment. Crimes are just as interesting to analyze, which is probably what this was. So hear me out, alright? Dorian was quite a venerated performer in the industry, right? Her name was a big one, and what I'm trying to get at is I think that Dorian knew that she was not only responsible for her own reputation, but that she also represented an already deeply underrepresented and villainized minority. The ballroom is a safe space for a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have one. Playing the role she did in the voguing transformation in the 80s, this crime coming out at the time most definitely would have tainted an already tainted image. This was a different time, and there's no doubt in my mind that had Dorian reported the crime, then not only she, but the drag and transgender communities would be villainized. Remember, this crime very well could have taken place all the way back in like the 60s, 70s. And I'm not too versed on the laws, but I am pretty certain that it was a big no-no to even engage in any sexual acts with the same gender in those ancient times, especially living where she did. Cops constantly targeting people of color, you know, being on you, harassing you. Like, yeah, now just go ask for their protection. Good fucking luck. Like, the reason I think it's so important to discuss ballroom and drag history and culture is because the prejudice and oppression toward the queer community is so closely connected to the ongoing struggles experienced by Black and Latino Americans. Yet, queer issues involving Black and Latino LGBT people are not deemed as important in race-based social movements since it's not even recognized as a race issue in the first place. I really do believe that that particular divide is a major reason why many people in our country invalidate the struggles of queer people, because there's so much discrimination within our own communities, even though like we're all just struggling in our own ways. Like, dude, if there's one moral I'll fucking die on, and I cannot stress this enough, leave each other the fuck alone. We're all going through it, dude. This is a conversation for another time, but I really think social media is straight up fucking desensitized the human race to humility, and everybody's just like forgotten that if you have nothing nice to say, just shut the fuck up. I truly have no idea what happened to minding your own business, but that legitimately seems to just not exist. But back to what I was saying, I really don't think that you can have as effective a conversation of the history of the LGBT community without also recognizing the struggles experienced by the Black and Latino people in it who created the safe spaces of ballrooms and the platforms to speak on these issues of injustice. There's so much shit relevant today that is derived from drag culture, mainly like vocabulary and makeup techniques, but isn't recognized as such. And it reminds me a whole fucking lot of how there's so many modern trends in Western culture that is just directly inspired by Black women, but again, is not recognized as such. Both queer individuals and people of color in America face structural and interpersonal discrimination, which can lead to unequal outcomes in crucial areas of life, such as asking for help and trusting resources. Because even if you haven't personally dealt with the discrimination that just sort of comes with not being born a straight white man in America, many of us are still raised with that sentiment to beware of the very real danger of involving law enforcement. Lord knows justice is hardly served, so might as well fucking deal with your problems the best you can, hide away what you can, you know? So much of the violence toward LGBT Black and Latino people is normalized within the family systems and churches and whatnot of those very same people, which is crucial because to many people, these are massive areas in life that are vital in determining who is worthy of respect and who belongs in this community that you didn't even ask to be born into. Also, to what extent your identity as a person is tolerated or accepted. It's giving, I still love and accept you, but I do not respect or agree with your life choices. Even though, hopefully, most of us can recognize that nobody asks to be born in the body they're born into, you know, especially not for one that's going to make it that much more difficult for you to enjoy and be accepted in life. Like, nobody wants that. Nobody desires to live a harder life than they already have to just because they're born a certain way. That's why, as tragic as it is, so many people go for so many years or even their entire lives masking their authentic selves.
I always had hopes of being a big star. And then I look, as you get older, you aim a little lower. And you say, well, yeah, you still might make an impression. Everybody wants to leave something behind them, some impression, some mark upon the world. And then you think, you left a mark on the world if you just get through it. And a few people remember your name. Then you left a mark. You don't have to bend the whole world. I think it's better to just enjoy it. Pay your dues and enjoy it. If you shoot an arrow and it goes real high, hooray for you.